A quiet life, an unquiet ending. The door was locked from the inside, yet the window screen looked forced. In a city of cameras and rules, a quiet actor died with too many questions left behind. Beijing at night is rarely silent. Even in residential districts, the city hums beneath layers of concrete, surveillance, and routine. But on that night, inside a private apartment, the silence was complete. No witnesses, no voices raised, only a body discovered too late, and a story that ended before anyone realized it was still being written. The man was 37 years old. According to initial reports, the apartment door had been locked from the inside. That detail was emphasized early, almost as if it were meant to reassure. An accident, the narrative suggested. A tragic fall after drinking. A simple explanation for a sudden death. Yet other details refused to align so neatly. The window screen appeared forced. The timeline between the last known gathering and the discovery of the body remained unclear. Personal items were found in pockets where they seemed out of place. Each fact, taken alone, could be dismissed. Together, they formed a pattern that resisted closure. The man at the center of this story was not known for controversy. He was known for restraint. Born in the summer of 1988 in Xinjiang, he grew up far from the capital, raised by a single mother who taught music. His childhood was modest, shaped more by discipline and books than by noise or privilege. Those who knew him often described the same qualities: quiet, attentive, gentle. He was not a performer who demanded attention. He waited for it patiently if it came at all. His path into the entertainment industry was slow and uneven. Without powerful backing or influential connections, he auditioned repeatedly, accepted minor roles, and endured long periods of obscurity. When recognition finally arrived, it did so without spectacle. He became known for historical dramas, for characters marked by loyalty and restraint. The irony was not lost on those who followed his work. He played men of principle in worlds defined by power. Off-screen, his life remained deliberately small. He lived frugally. He avoided excess. He spoke little in interviews and revealed less. Injuries sustained during filming were treated as professional inconveniences rather than personal hardships. He continued working when others might have stopped. Over time, however, his public appearances grew fewer. By the early 2020s, his presence had noticeably faded. No official explanation was offered for that disappearance. In July of 2025, his personal studio was quietly dissolved. No announcement followed. No farewell message. To casual observers, it meant little. To those familiar with the industry, it suggested pressure without language, conflict without documentation. 2 months later, he was gone. News of his death spread quickly, not because he was the most famous figure in the industry, but because he was one of its quietest. Fans did not mourn a scandal. They mourned a person they believed had lived carefully and harmed no one. As official statements urged restraint and privacy, questions multiplied instead. If everything had been ordinary, there would have been nothing to examine. But nothing about the scene felt ordinary. If everything was an accident, then why does the scene read like someone wanted the story to end before it was ever told? Long before his name appeared in headlines tied to controversy, his life followed a far quieter trajectory. There were no sudden rises, no manufactured myths. What existed instead was endurance, practiced daily and without witnesses. He arrived in Beijing carrying little more than ambition and restraint. Unlike many of his peers, he did not enter the industry through spectacle or patronage. He trained. He waited. He accepted rejection with the same composure he later brought to success. Records show repeated auditions, minor roles, background appearances that rarely carried dialogue. It was not the kind of beginning that builds legends. It was the kind that tests whether someone intends to stay. Those early years established a pattern. He did not complain publicly. He did not leverage hardship for sympathy. When asked later about that period, he spoke in neutral terms, describing it as necessary, almost instructional. Suffering in his telling was not dramatic. It was procedural. Recognition arrived gradually. A supporting role gained unexpected attention. A low-budget historical drama found a wide audience. He became associated with a particular image, refined, restrained, almost anachronistic in an industry that rewarded volume and excess. Viewers noted his stillness, his ability to convey emotion without declaration. Critics called it subtlety. Colleagues called it discipline. Despite growing visibility, his private life did not expand alongside it. He rented modestly. He avoided conspicuous spending. Accounts from crew members describe a performer who arrived early, left late, and maintained a deliberate distance from industry social circuits. Invitations were declined without explanation. Silence became both his boundary and his shield. Injury followed him quietly. Filming schedules demanded physical endurance that left little room for recovery. On one production, a fall from rigging resulted in fractures that would have justified suspension. He returned to set instead. On another, a contact lens shattered during a scene, cutting into his eye. He completed the shoot before seeking treatment. These incidents were documented only later. Not through press releases, but through recollections, as if pain itself had been treated as confidential information. Over time, that accumulation left marks that were not immediately visible. By the late 2010s, those close to him noted a change in energy rather than behavior. He was still polite, still precise, but he appeared thinner, more withdrawn. His schedule, once relentless, began to thin. From 2020 onward, his appearances declined sharply. Projects were announced, then delayed. Roles rumored, then reassigned. No statement clarified the shift. In an industry that communicates through absence as often as through words, the silence was noticeable. There were unconfirmed reports that he had refused certain expectations common within the entertainment system. No documentation supports these claims definitively. What can be verified is this: opportunities diminished without explanation, and his professional infrastructure quietly dissolved. In July of 2025, his personal studio was closed. No announcement accompanied the decision. It was administrative, almost surgical, as if meant to avoid attention. Financial records and later testimonies would reveal a further contradiction. While living with strict personal limits, he consistently diverted income elsewhere. Donations were made anonymously. Educational programs in remote regions received funding without attribution. Medical equipment appeared during disasters with no name attached. Only after his death did organizations come forward, identifying him as the source. This pattern suggests intent rather than impulse. Charity was not performance, it was routine. Those closest to him describe a man who believed that morality was not measured by recognition. He was reported to have said that good actions required no witnesses, and harmful ones required no justification. Whether this philosophy offered him strength or isolation remains open to interpretation. What is clear is that by the final year of his life, his world had become smaller, not by choice, but by compression. Fewer roles, fewer appearances, fewer places where his voice was heard. The industry continued without comment, as industries often do. Then, abruptly, it stopped for him. And then, in the year his presence faded the most, the final headline arrived, as if it had been waiting for him to stop fighting back. The official record begins with a date, September 11th, 2025. On that day, authorities confirmed that the actor had been found deceased inside a residential building in Beijing. The location was described as a private apartment belonging to a friend. Initial estimates placed the time of death sometime between the late evening of September 10th and the early hours of September 11th. The window of uncertainty was wide enough to matter, yet narrow enough to be treated as incidental. The preliminary conclusion was delivered quickly. According to police statements released shortly after, the cause of death was an accidental fall from height while under the influence of alcohol. The case, it was suggested, showed no signs of criminal involvement. At first glance, the explanation appeared sufficient. But when the known details are arranged in sequence, the clarity begins to thin. The apartment door, investigators stated, had been locked from the inside. This detail was emphasized repeatedly, functioning as a structural pillar of the accidental narrative. A locked door implies privacy. Privacy implies isolation. Isolation implies absence of interference. Yet the window through which the fall allegedly occurred told a more complicated story. Reports indicated that the mosquito screen attached to the window showed signs of being forcibly removed. This detail immediately raised practical questions. If the door was locked from the inside, how did external force reach the window screen? Was the damage consistent with accidental contact, or did it suggest deliberate manipulation? No photographs of the scene were released to the public. No diagrams clarified angles or measurements. The question remained suspended, unanswered. Then, there was the matter of time. Witness accounts confirmed that a gathering had taken place earlier that evening. However, the precise moment when the apartment fell silent is unclear. There exists a gap between the end of social activity and the discovery of the body. Within that gap, no verified record has been publicly disclosed. In cases of unexpected death, such intervals are critical. They define opportunity. They define sequence. They define what can and cannot be ruled out. Another point of contention involved personal belongings. 2 luxury wristwatches were reportedly found in the pockets of his clothing. The detail itself is mundane until examined in context. Why were they not worn? Why carried together? Were they moved or intentionally placed? No official clarification addressed these questions. They were mentioned briefly, then dropped from subsequent summaries. Medical observations added further ambiguity. Accounts circulating online described bruising on the body that some believed inconsistent with a simple fall. No autopsy report was released in full. No forensic explanation was provided to reconcile these observations with the official conclusion. In the absence of documentation, speculation filled the vacuum. Digital evidence proved even more elusive. Shortly after news of his death broke, a video began circulating online. It allegedly showed the actor in a hospital setting, visibly distressed. The clip spread rapidly, then disappeared just as quickly. Copies were removed. Searches yielded nothing. Platforms offered no explanation beyond standard policy enforcement. Whether the video was authentic remains unverified. Its sudden erasure, however, became part of the narrative itself. Each element, when isolated, could be dismissed as coincidence or misinterpretation. Accidents do occur. Screens can break. Objects can be misplaced. Online content can vanish for ordinary reasons. But investigations are not built on isolated elements. They are built on alignment. In this case, alignment was absent. Families of the deceased often face a dilemma at such moments. Public doubt can amplify private grief. In this instance, his mother issued a statement, urging the public to refrain from speculation. She attributed the tragedy to an unfortunate accident following alcohol consumption and asked that her son be allowed to rest in peace. Her words carried weight and they deserve respect. At the same time, respect does not eliminate inquiry. Transparency is not an accusation. It is a standard. To date, no comprehensive report detailing the apartment layout, window height, angle of fall, or forensic findings has been made available to the public. No independent review has been announced. The case remains closed in official terms, yet unresolved in the public mind. What remains is not an alternative theory, but a list of unanswered questions. And questions once asked have a way of persisting. The official explanation closed the case quickly, but the unanswered details did not close with it. In the days following his death, something unexpected occurred. The story did not fade. Instead, it migrated. As domestic discussions slowed under caution and restraint, conversations reappeared elsewhere, carried by individuals who had never met him and owed him nothing. Online petitions began circulating across borders, written in careful language that avoided accusation but demanded transparency. Signatures accumulated steadily, not from devoted fans alone, but from people who described themselves as observers, concerned citizens, or simply witnesses to a story that felt incomplete. The calls were consistent. Release the full investigative report. Clarify the scene. Allow independent review. Separate verified facts from assumptions. These were not revolutionary demands. They mirrored standards applied routinely in other jurisdictions. What distinguished this case was not the content of the request, but the resistance to addressing it. Information began to thin. Posts disappeared. Keywords triggered restrictions. Users adopted coded language, metaphors, and visual substitutions to continue discussion. Names were replaced with symbols. Images were altered to avoid detection. Entire communities relocated to external platforms, not to amplify rumor, but to preserve continuity. Silence, in this context, did not arrive naturally. It was maintained. Against this digital erosion, fragments of memory took on disproportionate weight. Ordinary encounters were recalled and shared. A moment at an airport where he knelt to help a pregnant stranger tie her shoe. A quiet intervention on set when a crew member panicked over a mistake. An actor who greeted everyone first, regardless of status. None of these moments were captured for publicity. They surfaced only because the people involved felt compelled to speak after his death. The cumulative effect was not myth-making. It was pattern recognition. Accounts from former colleagues reinforced the same image. He avoided hierarchy. He avoided humiliation. He treated labor as equal, whether performed on camera or behind it. When exhaustion overtook the set, he was described as the one who stayed alert, who noticed discomfort before it was verbalized. These recollections gained further weight when contrasted with the absence of self-promotion during his life. His charitable contributions, revealed only posthumously, suggested long-term commitment rather than reactive generosity. Educational programs in remote regions, medical equipment delivered without attribution, monthly donations automated to ensure continuity even when attention shifted elsewhere. Perhaps the most enduring symbol of his presence emerged far from any screen. During the final year of his life, he participated in a television program filmed in a rural mountain region. Among the activities was the construction of a simple wall made from dried mugwort. It was a minor segment, easily overlooked in broadcast. After his death, local residents and fans pooled resources to preserve it, not because it was architecturally remarkable, but because it bore the imprint of his labor. The wall remains. It stands quietly, unchanged, open to weather and time. No plaque explains its significance. No narrative accompanies it. Yet it functions as physical contradiction. In a world where digital records can be erased, a handmade object persists without permission. Personal correspondence added another layer. Letters written by a former assistant surfaced online, addressed to him after his passing. They were not accusatory. They were confessional. Regret for absence. Apologies for misreading exhaustion as resilience. Reflections on a man who absorbed pressure without complaint and concealed injury to avoid burdening others. The tone was not political. It was intimate and therefore difficult to dismiss. What emerges from these materials is not evidence of a crime, but evidence of a life lived under compression. A person who chose restraint in an environment that rewards excess. A person whose refusal to conform left him exposed rather than protected. As attention expanded internationally, reactions intensified. Some framed the case as emblematic of broader systemic issues within the entertainment industry. Others resisted that framing, warning against overreach. Both positions shared a common ground, the recognition that the official narrative had failed to satisfy reasonable inquiry. The question was no longer limited to how he died. It had shifted to why clarity was considered optional. Controlled silence operates differently than ordinary forgetfulness. It requires effort. It requires coordination. And it often produces the opposite of its intended effect. The more content vanished, the more people archived it. The more discussion was restricted, the more it proliferated elsewhere. This was not devotion. It was friction. When a life leaves behind no scandal, no cruelty, and no stain, absence becomes conspicuous. In such cases, doubt does not arise from malice. It arises from inconsistency. And inconsistency demands attention. When a life leaves behind no scandal, no cruelty, and no stain, the question becomes sharper. What kind of world needed him gone? This story does not end with certainty. It ends with restraint. We do not claim knowledge where documentation is absent. We do not assign guilt where evidence has not been publicly examined. And we do not replace investigation with emotion. What we do insist upon is a principle older than any system that attempts to manage attention. When a death leaves unanswered questions, silence is not a conclusion. According to official statements, the case was resolved quickly. An accident, an unfortunate fall. a closed file. Yet closure requires more than a label. It requires alignment between explanation and observable detail. In this case, that alignment was never fully demonstrated. The locked door, the damaged window screen, the gap in the timeline, the missing forensic transparency, the digital traces that appeared, then vanished. Each element on its own could be dismissed. Together, they form a record that feels incomplete by design or by neglect. Either possibility carries consequence. We acknowledge the pain of those closest to him. A mother's request for privacy deserves respect. Grief is not an obligation to participate in public debate, but privacy and transparency are not mutually exclusive. One protects the living, the other protects the truth. History shows that unresolved cases do not disappear. They settle, they wait, they resurface when context shifts and records are reopened. The absence of scandal in his life has made the silence surrounding his death louder, not quieter. In systems where wrongdoing is common, innocence becomes an anomaly, and anomalies demand explanation. What remains most striking is not how he died, but how he lived. A man who avoided spectacle in an industry built on it. A man who diverted resources quietly without expectation of praise. A man who treated labor and dignity as indivisible. A man whose final physical trace is not a monument, but a simple wall built by hand. When digital histories can be erased, physical memory becomes evidence. When voices are restricted, repetition becomes resistance. And when a narrative closes too neatly, attention reopens it. We do not ask viewers to choose a theory. We ask them to recognize a gap. We do not ask for outrage. We ask for standards. Transparency is not an attack on authority. It is a measure of its confidence. Independent review is not hostility. It is credibility. And questions are not threats. They are the foundation of accountability. Until the investigative record is complete, this case remains what it never deserved to be. Unresolved. A quiet life ended loudly. A file closed prematurely. A story still waiting for its final entry. Until the missing pieces are placed back on the record, his story remains what it never deserved to be. A quiet life ended loudly and filed away too soon.